James Davis, Popsky's Private Expeditions. We're out here in the Tunisian Sahara. Well, we're actually in Wilder's Gap at the moment, which is the location where the Long Range Desert Group and the New Zealand Division started their flanking of the German defenses on the Meurthe line. But that's another story. It's been kind of a topic of conversation for us while we've been out here in the desert, because we have a good mix of old crew, been out with us before, new people who've never seen the desert. And someone asked me a couple of days ago when we were doing the training phase, you know, what are the key elements if I'm setting up a truck and I want to go out to the desert? And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. And there's sort of 5 key elements that you really need. And the first one is tires. So, you know, when people are building their trucks and they're driving around in Europe or the UK, they love to have big fat tires with big deep mud terrain tread patterns on them. That is the exact wrong tire you want for the desert. So in the desert, you want an AT, an all-terrain tire. You want a minimal tread. You want a very least aggressive tread you can get. So I'm using Falken Wild Peak ATs. These are relatively inexpensive in the UK. They come standard on Toyota 4x4s leaving the factory in Japan, and they're quite well respected in the United States, and they're gaining respect in the UK. The advantage for me is you can get these quite cheaply. Well, I tend to go through a few of them here and there because there's so many thorns out in the desert that you get punctures on the shoulder, so they'll take you through the trip. And they tend to then become my spare tire, but I can replace them fairly cheaply. And the reason you want these is because when you do get into loose sand, an aggressive tread is just going to dig a hole in the sand really quickly. Your engine has to work a whole lot harder. Your whole drivetrain suffers a lot of abuse if you're running a really aggressive tread pattern. So you have to kind of give up your ego a little bit and your sort of personal preferences and get rid of the big mud terrains and get yourself a fairly bland looking all-terrain tire if you want to go into the desert. Unless you really enjoy shoveling, and then feel free, use your mud terrains. So the second really important rule when you're planning on going to the desert is weight. The more you carry, the harder your vehicle has to work. The harder your suspension has to work on rough ground, going over dunes or rocks. Harder your engine has to work, and harder your entire drivetrain has to work. And when you're airing down your tires for better traction in the sand, all the extra weight you're carrying, just creates that much more stress. Your fuel consumption goes up. It just makes everything much more difficult. So one of the keys to desert travel is travel light as you can. Obviously, the Category A PPE trucks are as stripped down as you can make them. So we drive down from Europe with roofs and doors and all the normal accessories on. When we get down to Duz, which is our desert stepping off point, all that comes off and goes into storage. We want to travel as light as we can. So the only weight we really carry is 1 spare tire. We have a couple of jerry cans of extra fuel, as much fuel on board as we can carry for the distance we're going to be covering. Lots of water, so I normally would carry 3 to 4 jerry cans of water, one of them being a lifesaver so we can filter the water. And anything else that we don't need gets stripped off. And there's a couple other reasons for that as well. Top heavy weight, so you see the famous Camel Trophy type vehicles with a big roof rack and tires and fuel cans up there. While I love and respect the Camel Trophy, it has done a massive disservice to the overlanding world. This idea of having rooftop tents, jerry cans, all sorts of crap piled way up high when you're on uneven rolling ground is just a recipe for disaster. So weight is the second major factor when you are prepping an overland vehicle. And for us, we always remember that the early World War II desert explorers had open-top Jeeps, very similar to my lightweight, or the open-top Chevs, but roofs, doors, windscreens were considered luxury items that were not necessary, and we tend to stick to the same sort of theory. Now, the third major thing you got to think about is driver skill. So driver skill will balance out a few things. So if you have a truck that has bad tires, then if you have a lot of driver skill, you can somewhat counter for having bad tires. But it's just going to put extra stress on the driver, and there's no way to get around, as good as a driver is, putting extra stress on the vehicle, your drivetrain, suspension, everything, by having bad tires and too much weight. And so part of a PPE trip, we always spend the first couple of days in a variety of terrain, heavy, bad sand, rocky terrain, areas where navigation becomes really difficult because the maps are just big blank spots. And that's where we do our first couple of training days on each trip. And so we try to build up driver skills. So if someone has come to the desert with the wrong tires or carrying too much weight, hopefully we can get their driver skill level up where they find a way to counter that. So if you think back to the Long Range Desert Group, they had good tires, not great rubber in those days, but they were good tires. They were good for the desert, but they couldn't do anything about weight. They were traveling 1,000 miles on a patrol, so they had to carry lots of food, lots of fuel, lots of spare parts, lots of supplies, and there wasn't much they could do about that. So their counter was to be having really well-trained, experienced drivers that could balance out that overweight. But getting your driver skills up, understanding your vehicle, understanding the power curve, and when you put your foot down, how long it takes for the power to come, which gear to use, when to use high range, when to use low range, when to use low 2, when to use low 3. This only really comes with experience. And so driver skill is the third thing. So the fourth thing, when you're thinking about coming out to the desert, is your engine and your vehicle type. I hate to break it to any Americans watching, but petrol engines, not the best idea. Diesel engines have it in every regard above petrol. Yeah, you get a smooth and very responsive engine, but when we're out in the desert, your fuel consumption will never match a diesel, and fuel consumption is really important. Diesels are also significantly more reliable in the desert. There's no points, there's no electronic ignition. Modern trucks, there's no computer systems running anything that when the sand and the dust gets into can really mess around with things. You probably can't see it, but even my turn signal unit is all covered up with duct tape and plastic, because if the dust gets in there, it'll mess around with the electrics. I lost my turn signals on the last trip. So the type of vehicle you're using is something to think about. So we use old Land Rovers. Typically, we upgrade our engines from the original. Shimmy is using a 2.5 liter 200 turbo diesel injected engine, the 200 TDI. It's mated to a standard 4-speed gearbox. I've got a Roamer drive, which is an overdrive system that allows me to have a fifth gear for the motorway, but also to play around a bit with my low range so that I have the right gear selection for the right type of terrain. Massive engines actually aren't an advantage in the desert. I mean, if you want to go to Saudi Arabia and do what they do, racing up the massive dunes and power curving through the sand, fine. You want a big, powerful V8. But for the kind of things we do, where we do long distances, we're in all sorts of different types of terrain. A diesel, somewhere around a 2.5 or 3 liter is probably all you need. Now on this trip, we actually have a Series 3, looks like a Series 2A, but it's actually a Series 3, and it's got the original 2.25 liter petrol engine in it. And it's been doing really, really well. The biggest problem is he can't carry a lot of personal gear because he's got to carry so much fuel. He's got twin tanks, which helps. We have a 109 with a V8 petrol. Virtually 3/4 of his load is jerry cans of fuel, plus all the fuel in his tanks, just to match what an average diesel with an average size fuel tank can do. So you don't necessarily need masses of power. Low range and some driver skill will take you where you need to go in any desert environment. It'll take you a long way. It has no electronics, and it will keep going through the worst conditions. And that probably goes to the next point, which is the modern vehicles. So we have a driver here, a co-driver, who went through a modern Land Rover training course for the new Defenders. And it probably did him a disservice because he came back from an expedition that Land Rover had sponsored, and they were using the new Defenders out in the desert. And the problem with those trucks is the truck does everything for you. It tells you what gear, it decides, you know, what power curve and what suspension setting, and it's all electronic. And there's advantages to that, but it really takes away from the experience. So we much prefer a very simple, very easy to repair, basic mechanical skills, and these trucks will go anywhere we want them to go for as long as we want. And if on Land Rovers, things will break, but they're always minor things, and you can always fix them relatively easily. So a simple diesel vehicle is the way you want to go. And then number 5, probably the last thing, is planning and research. So before you come out to the desert, you really want to do your research. So we put a great deal of effort into researching the areas that we're going to be in. We study satellite photos. We've got old 1941 War Office maps because we tend to be looking at historical locations. And you want to know things about the culture, things about where you're going to be able to access fuel, where hospitals are if anyone gets sick or you get a minor injury. It's good to know where mechanics are. In this part of Tunisia, we have a guide with us, and we very often will use a guide because we got stopped at a police checkpoint last night. There's not many tourists that come to this area, very few in fact. They hardly ever see them, and we were just a complete unknown to them. Super friendly guys, but they had to do some checking, and they followed us around for a little while this morning just to see what we were actually up to, because obviously a group of foreigners looking at rusty bits of metal in the middle of the desert is just a very peculiar thing to them. But we'd done our research, and we had a guide who knew what we were doing, and he could talk to the local police, and the police basically now said, okay, fine, you guys seem to be okay, and they've left us alone. We need permits for some places we go. There's a military restricted zone not far from here that we had to make sure that we weren't going to be wandering into, and if we did, we'd need a military escort. Turns out we don't. But research. How far are you going to have to go between resupplies of fuel, water, and food? And so we have it all planned out. I've got a really good team that supports me, that does the navigation planning and a lot of the historical research, and everyone chips in, everyone brings a skill set to the table. And yeah, it's a really great group. We have an IT guy who's turned out to be the greatest scout ever. Yesterday we got caught in a place where we had no idea how to get out of the area we were in, and we were only a couple of hours away from losing daylight, and we had to get to this place where Burumir, the start of Wilder's Gap route, by the end of last night. And so I just turned to him and said, find me a way. And he found me a way, and we made it here in a reasonable amount of time. And he's done it for me a couple of times. We've come into an area called Fesh Fesh, which is just really horrible sand, and the locals won't go into it. And I've turned to my IT guy, Juanes, and I said, Juanes, find me a way out of here. And he found us a way. We avoided the sand completely. And yeah, it was a great experience. So yeah, when you come to the desert, the more preparation, the more research, the more thinking, the more planning you do, the better experience you're going to have. And so that sums up the 5 top skills you're going to need. The right tires, minimal weight, driver skill, select the right vehicle or set up the vehicle as best you can for the conditions you're going to be in, and then finally do your research and planning. And if you do all of that, you're going to have a great time in the desert, guaranteed. Anyway, so that's the recommendations from Popsky's Private Expeditions.